So I had an online discussion with a friend of mine, and he said, "Well, who understands an economy?" This guy has an MBA, and I realized in that moment that I understood what an economy was, and he didn't. So I asked him, "What do you think an economy is?" And he replied, "Hey, well, actually, it's very complicated." And I replied, "Actually, it's not. Just do it in one sentence. That should suffice." And he struggled. He just said all this stuff that we buy and sell. Okay, that's a good definition. But I prefer to think of it as a graph where valued transactions happen on the edges between vertices in the graph. And the call got silent. "What's a graph?" he asked. So I'm making this video because I looked up what an economy was on Google, as you can see, and it talks about the wealth and resources of a country or region, or careful management of resources, or the careful use of something, or financial saving. And but it doesn't actually give you the answer because this is Google. So Google is not very good at giving you the answer. It's good at giving you a link that is heavily weighed to be considered the answer, but it doesn't actually do a lot of checking to make sure the answer it gives you is correct. And so, with that in mind, I have decided to just start with this. You might think of the economy as being a directed acrylic graph. No, it's not. You are not the center of the universe. It's important to understand that even though the economy is a graph, it is not a directed acrylic graph because there is no center point. When you think about your finances and stuff, you plan it out as you being the center. And that's okay because that's the only thing you really care about. You're not worried about the price of tea in China, for example. But you are worried about your ability to buy and sell, the money that you have in your account to buy things and procure food and rent and so forth. And that's fine. But in reality, you actually do need to think about it in terms of a graph. And so, with that in mind, the economy is nothing more than a graph of people who can buy, sell, manufacture, or consume. That's it. Every node on the graph is an entity, a person, a company, whatever, that can do those four things, including yourself. And so, even your dog or your cat is an edge, or actually is a node on that graph, because the edge is the transaction of you feeding them. Okay? Do you understand? Because the dog has to eat, so they consume. That's one of the four things we've talked about. And so, when you think about discrete mathematics and graph theory, it's very, very, very easy to figure out what an economy is. Because at the end of the day, we are all in the global economy, which is actually composed of multiple subnetworks, each referenced by its own currency, issued by different sovereign states to represent a universal value exchange. And so, as part of that, you should understand that most of the time you are accessing one subset of the global economy because of the currency that you're using, aka you are transacting in American dollars, and as a result of that, you can only transact with either entities that can transact in American dollars, or if you're using something like a credit card or something, you're going to be able to transact in other currencies because the intermediary, in this case, the money seller or the bank or whatever you want to call them nowadays, the credit card company in this case, will actually transact that for you through their own operations. For example, if I have to sell or buy something in Icelandic kronar, chances are I'm not going to have that on hand, but my bank probably has access or knows a guy at the Bank of Iceland. And so as a result of that, if I'm paying somebody in Iceland, what's going to happen is I'm going to use my credit card The payment method is going to go to the person in Iceland, and their bank is going to pay them in Icelandic kronar. And then on the back end, the bank is going to make a deal with my bank to figure out what the actual cost of that was in American dollars, charge me the difference because there's always a fee for that. And at that point, I've just paid somebody in Icelandic kronars, even though I don't have any on hand, even though I'm an American, right? So an economy is not something that's hard to understand. And if you're a software development engineer, you should have this data in your head. This is not one of, this is not a, how can I say this? You should understand what graphs are, which means you should be able to put this in your head. And if you don't, and you're having trouble with the video so far, back up, read the pages I'm referencing, and think about it in terms of you are the node in a graph. Every time you buy, sell, manufacture, consume, you're doing something that connects those dots. For example, in this thing here, let's just say I've got, yeah, so I've got 6, 4, 5, 1, 3. So 6 and right here by my head, 6 and 4. See that line? That's a transaction. That's you paying your rent. But wait, it's not actually you paying your rent because you're not actually buying your rent. You're selling your currency to receive your rent. Huh? Now, you might think of it as different than that, but in reality, what's really happening is the current value of your rent is going to be a stable, hopefully, value that is agreed on in advance. And you're going to be able to say, oh, it's X amount of money every month, and you're on a contract that keeps it stable, hopefully. Or maybe you're on a month to month and they jerk you around as much as they want. It doesn't matter. Either way, it's going to be a value and a currency that you've probably agreed on in advance. Because if you're in America, it's going to be in American dollars. If you're in the UK, it's going to be British pounds or the euro. It's going to be fairly stable. But what you're really doing there is you're selling that currency to procure the resource. Because buying and selling are effectively the same thing. It just depends on which side of that transaction you're on, because the transaction looks completely different to 6 than it does to 4 over my head here. And so you might ask yourself, well, Dwayne, all I've got is Icelandic krona. I don't have any American dollars. What do I do? I'm stuck in Iceland. You go to the bank and you do foreign exchange, which is the practice of buying and selling money for other money. Pretty simple. And through that process, you can figure out the relative value exchange. And if you're dealing in American dollars and buying Icelandic krona, then you're probably going to make out like a bandit because the exchange rate's pretty favorable last I checked. But I am sick of people in finance and business not understanding discrete mathematics. I feel like as an engineer, we should understand these things better anyway. And I'm realizing that if we as engineers can understand this better than the so-called MBAs, that will help us. So this has been your lesson in finance.